Talofa lava, it's Tim Tafanga here. It's Sunday, the 18th of January 2026. I'm doing this live streaming, I was about to say, but I'm going to do a recording to discuss the recent Greenland annexation proposal by the American administration, the Trump administration, which is now known as the doctrine, the Donroe Doctrine. Now, we all know the Monroe Doctrine, which was it was a policy formulation by the former president of the United States of America, President Monroe, in the early 19th century, in which he promulgated the Monroe Doctrine, which was to prevent any foreign interference in the American continent, and that included Central and South America as well as North America. Now, the Donroe Doctrine of President Trump in 2026 is a step further from the Monroe Doctrine, in that it promulgates the removal of any foreign imperialist interventions or colonial connections with the American continent, and that is specifically with regards to Greenland by the Kingdom of Denmark, and with the British Empire with Canada. Now, that in itself opens up a whole heap of of worms that would impinge upon the British Empire and the CHOGM that we as Samoans are very familiar with. Now, the Commonwealth Heads of Government meetings, CHOGM, which recently was held in Samoa in 2024, and that in itself was harping onto the British Empire with King Charles' visit to Samoa, staying in Su'umu and in other areas of Samoa during the CHOGM events that were happening in Samoa. Now, Greenland is part of the Danish Empire. Now, Greenland itself is 26 kilometers from Canada. Canada itself is part of the British Empire, albeit the Commonwealth of Nations. Now, similar to Australia and New Zealand, that has presented a particular problem for the British Empire, insofar as what is happening with the Donroe Doctrine is a process of referring back to the post-World War II decolonisation foreign policy and international trend that primarily happened in Africa and Asia, with all, and also the South Pacific, with the decolonizations of many of these countries. Although a lot of these countries had maintained their republics and the establishments of their decolonized republics, they were still members of the Commonwealth Heads of Government or the British Empire, regardless of whether they became republics or independent nations. Take, for example, Samoa. Now, Samoa is an independent country with its own head of state. However, it's still a member of the CHOGM, that, as well as Tonga, the Kingdom of Tonga, and the Republic of Fiji. Now, The only other countries that aren't part of the Commonwealth, aren't independent but are still members of the Commonwealth includes Papua New Guinea. Now, referring back to Greenland. Now, Greenland is within the American orbit of the national security strategy, is crucial. Greenland has a population of about 55,000, which is similar to American Samoa. So American Samoa's population is the same as Greenland. But of course, Greenland's a lot bigger. But population-wise, we're talking about American Samoa. Now, what's the difference between American Samoa and Greenland? Well, of course, they're both, territories by other countries. So what we're seeing here in Greenland is the American asserting their policy to annex Greenland, and that makes sense from a geopolitical Orwellian regional perspective. Now, when you look at the Danish Empire and the Danish kingdom, which is, in relative terms, its population and the distance between Greenland and Denmark is over 3,500 kilometers. Now, with that in mind, you would understand that 3,500 kilometers, as opposed to 26 kilometers to Canada, is a fair distance in terms of the American continent and the Donroe Doctrine making more sense, and the whole philosophy of decolonisation and ending Eurocentric European empires throughout the New World and other global regions. Now, the British would always be very adamant in holding on to their imperial greatness after losing America in 1776. This year in itself is 250 years since 1776, when America had attained its independence from the King George III in 1776. So America had attained its independence through the the War of Independence. Recently, the Americans had the war against the Canadians in 1812, the War of 1812, and now we're seeing the 2026, 250 years later, with the Americans reverting back to Canada, reminding them of the War of 1812, the continuation of that conflict, and as well as the expulsion of the Danish Empire from the American continental orbit. So that makes sense from an Orwellian regional perspective. So that is my spin on the Donroe Doctrine. I've written a little propaganda spin in my blog spot, which I've included into this YouTube. So I think 2026 will be a year commemorating the 250 years of American independence and the liberation of Greenland, and perhaps further along, the continuation of the 1812 conflict between the British Canadians and the Americans. So we'll be looking at the decolonisation of both Canada and Greenland in the foreseeable future. Yeah, malota malo soifua, yeah, doi kalungoa